Good morning, all. Welcome to our December IHE Third Thursday Lunch and Learn. And thank you all for being here. This morning, we have the pleasure of learning from Laurie Pasler, who is the project director for Courtroom 600. Courtroom 600 came about after Laurie inherited her father's hidden World War II memorabilia and from his working on and being involved as a guard at the Nuremberg War Crimes. Laurie discovered a need for education about this unexposed slice of history. The Courtroom 600 project was born, again, out of her frustration in researching the trials through the available online sources and hundreds of books. In 2016, she founded Descendants Media Group NFP to preserve the legacy of the Nuremberg trials and of the events at Nuremberg and teach its lessons to further generations in a new way. Now, in partnership with educators, historians, and digital media experts, she actively brings Courtroom 600 project to life. And last spring, I became aware of this project with Howard Epstein, and we are very honored to be continually working with Laurie and with actually Bill Wax, who is also on the program right now, with this project. And we're very excited about what the future brings with the project, which will tell you a couple things at the end. But I'm going to turn it over to Laurie now. So again, welcome back to Omaha via Zoom.
Thank you so much, Scott, and hello, everyone. Thanks for your time to come and listen today to my story. It's been a journey since 2015 when I lost my dad and inherited a crumpled shopping bag of his hidden war memorabilia. Since that time, so much research and books, as you can see here. But I want to start with, 2025 is going to be a very pivotal year. It's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war. And not only that, it is the anniversary in January, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I think there's going to be some big online activity around that, which I am going to be consolidating. So that's just the start of the 80th anniversary year. But the events that unfolded in the spring, as the war was coming to a close, and as the Allies were finally in Germany, we uncovered all of their crimes, all that they had plundered from other countries. And this in particular is the Merkers mine underground with all of the gold from occupied countries. And here is General Eisenhower with his team and General Patton and Bradley, and they're opening up all of these things and finding gold stolen from concentration camp prisoners and smushed into boxes, and the rings, the wedding rings, absolutely gruesome. This was all uncovered in the spring. And then they found the art. All of the stolen art in hundreds of locations just piled up. Here's Hermann Goering, Hitler's designated successor, at the Jeu de Paume in Paris, selecting artwork with Hitler for their own personal use. And here's another one of the places where that artwork was discovered, in Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany. And here are the monuments men carting out some of the loot from there. This all happened in the spring. And then the war ended in Europe on May 8th. There were two victories. Victory in Europe was May 8th, and victory in the eastern region in Japan was not until August. But this is what it looked like after May 8th, the end of the war in London with Churchill and the crowds and the celebrations. Here's Paris. People just going bananas. Moscow, the day they ran out of vodka, and that's a true story. But here's what Nuremberg looked like, and much of Germany. And this is what Hitler did to Germany. 90% of the city center was completely bombed out. There were 20,000 people still dead and buried under the rubble months later. And this picture was taken as the Allies approached to begin setting up for trial. Now, the war crimes were identified as early as 1941. And this picture in 1945 was after many, many sessions of Churchill, Truman, and Stalin negotiating how they would put a trial on and who they would try. This is Nuremberg, which was ultimately decided as the place for trial for a number of reasons, as the Americans are coming in to set up for trial. And there were about 650 people that were part of the trial, and my dad was one of them, and he never shared his story with us. He witnessed history in this city and saw some of the worst crimes committed, and in the jail guarded the worst prisoners of all time and never told us about it. Here's my dad right here, and these are prison guards. There was a women's wing also because there were wives and witnesses. So in that crumpled shopping bag, I started to go through and try and piece his story together. Now, this is his Army discharge papers, and don't get caught up in all the details, but he was from Milwaukee, and he entered into Fort Sheridan at Illinois, pardon me, and it lists him, as you see, as a clerk typist, and he had gone through Rhineland, Normandy, and done these different ground combat things. All right, so he's a typist. But then take a look at this restricted authorization card. It was folded in 3, and he probably had it in his wallet all the time. It's calling him counterintelligence for internal security detachment. And pardon me, he's asking the military police are saying, don't question him, just let him go. It's hand signed by the prison commandant too, who I would learn is Burton Andrus. All right. And then I get a hold of these, and my dad's not wearing his Army uniform anymore. And if he's a clerk typist, where's the typewriter? So this was the beginning of my journey in trying to discover what my dad truly did and how to piece together all of those things that he saved and hid. These 2 authorizations got him into the prison. And again, at the time, I'm thinking, if you're a typist, what are you doing in the major war criminals wing? This is an incredibly rare pass, I would come to learn. Not many people were allowed in. So in the span of about 2 years, my dad really grew up. And you can see it in this picture taken in 43 when he went into the Army, and then in the rubble of Nuremberg. The types of things that he saved were everything from dinner menus for his Christmas vacation, some of his friends, meal passes, colored postcards, and he actually wrote a letter to his sister on actual Palace of Justice stationery with the mark of the Nazis on it. Then there was this huge tranche of smuggled Army diaries. It took me years to figure these out, and it was a COVID project, actually, going through hundreds of onion skin papers to try and figure out what is Continental Central PWE 32. Well, and this is my dad's handwriting right here too, with battalion. This is a diary from a secret interrogation camp that the Allies formed before the war had even ended. You can see the date here of start is May 6th, and we know the war ended on the 8th. They needed a place to put the high value, the most senior ranked Nazis away from the limelight, away from the media where anyone could get to them until they could figure out what to do. And the war's not over. They know they're going to hold a trial, but they still have no idea where. So what this is prisoner of Continental Central Prisoner of War Exchange. That's what that is. And this is what it was. They took over this spa hotel in Luxembourg called the Palace, and they put a ring of electrified fence around it, stripped out all the luxury mattresses and chandeliers and the glass window panes as well. And they codenamed it Ashcan. The British had a similar type of a camp in their zone of occupation which they called dustbin. So a little bit of sarcasm in the Allied Army. But this is the class of 45. This picture was taken in front of Ashcan, the Palace Hotel. And there are 18 major war criminals here, along with some of the most high-ranking generals and other interested parties. Once I figured out who all these people were, I was pretty astounded that my father was there all summer with these people, from before the end of the war until they went to Nuremberg in August, when they were starting to prepare for trial. And so in my dad's papers, and I didn't really know who Hermann Goering was, but I certainly learned he was Hitler's designated successor. And here he is with Hitler in his promotional propaganda shot, promoting the 4-year plan. But some of the papers in my dad's collection were letters, daily and weekly updates on what was happening at the place. They built their own airstrip and called it LaGuardia, because you can imagine they've got all these high-value Nazis there. Everyone from the other groups of allies all wanted to see and interrogate them too. But I really understood where Goering was coming from at the end of the war by all of these progress reports. When he surrendered to the U.S. Army, one of his 16-piece matching luggage set contained over 20,000 paracodeine pills. He was addicted to a low-dose morphine. He was taking 20 in the morning and 20 at night. And the Army was deeply concerned. Here he is at his surrender with the white armband of surrender, and you can see he's bloated and sweating. And in June, this mugshot was actually taken at Ashcan. It's 2015. I've got all these things. I'm desperate to know more. The farther I got into my dad's papers, the more I wanted to know. But websites at that time only had these tiny little postage stamp pictures, and they all had only the same 6. Here's the courtroom, here's the dock with everyone. It's like, well, you know, and there's facts and figures, but I wanted to know the human experience. What was my dad's life like? You couldn't even drink water there without putting a chlorine tablet in it, because the city sanitation, everything was completely broken down. And the U.S. Army had so much work to do to prepare for 1,000 expats to come in and put this trial on. So I started ordering books. There's nothing like biographies and journalists, correspondence to tell the real story of the boots on the ground. And pretty soon, I was really getting the story from a number of angles. And I had so many books that I had to go rent an office space. I was teaching myself the story of World War II and the Holocaust and the Nuremberg trials in the only way I knew how, with color-coded index cards. I was drinking through a fire hose. What did I learn about Nuremberg? Well, it's a medieval city starting in 1050, and it's known for its gingerbread and sausages and Christmas market, but it's also known as the spiritual home of the Nazi Party, where every September there were huge Nazi Party rallies. Hundreds of thousands of people would gather there. This is the one of the propaganda shots called the Cathedral of Light, with all of these lighting here extending to virtually infinity. And it was made up of anti-aircraft searchlights. You can see everyone in the crowd all whipped up with their Nazi salute. I mean, it just really must have been something. But Nuremberg is also known for the Nuremberg race laws in 1935, where they began to indoctrinate children in schools with their pseudoscience. This picture right here is 2 Jewish boys at the front of the room being humiliated in front of their class. This is what everything in school was geared toward teaching this. And through Nazi racial ideology, this is just an astounding picture of the state of Europe at the height of Nazi power and how they had expanded, trying to take over everything. Well, I was starting to get a behind the scenes story. And as a producer, I I sought a way to consolidate all this information in a story-based experience for others, something that didn't currently exist. I wanted to create the kind of a website that I wanted to go and learn from. And so, because there are very few people left from this generation, it will be up to the descendants to carry forth all of these stories and lessons from World War II and the Holocaust. And our mission is to educate future generations through the transformative power of storytelling and digital technology. By learning from the past, we will foster empathy and help create a culture of peace, understanding, and tolerance. And so, with a nonprofit and the name of a project named after the room where the trials occurred, Courtroom 600, I set out then to start going to archives, first in search of my father, pieces of my father's story, photos, anything I could find to piece it together, all of these puzzle pieces that I had. Here's where the trials were held. Now I'd gone to the National Archives. I had large enough pictures I could make a whole PowerPoint, not just a tiny one. This was one of the reasons Nuremberg was chosen as the place for trial. Even though the city center was completely decimated, on the outskirts, there was this huge complex with enough room for 600 offices here, a standing courthouse attached to it, and in the back, in a radial formation here, those are prison wings. It checks all the boxes for a huge trial like this. This is Courtroom 600 right here on the third floor. And from the ground level, here's what it looked like. This was during the trial. The whole complex was guarded by tanks everywhere. And they closed the shades probably for filming that day. And you can see the guards looking out the window. Here's the jail wing in the radial formation. And this is the major war criminals wing where my dad had that pass to get into. They actually walled it off from the rest of the jail with a wooden wall, just as another security measure. And here's what it looked like on the inside. One guard for every cell, 24/7. Now, when they started out, they rotated and one person would guard every 4 cells. But there were a couple suicides, and so they beefed it up. And this is 1945. You can see they're running electricity with lighting here. They're being resourceful. They're trying to figure it out. You can see now there is a light being shined on Hermann Goering in his prison cell, and here it is. They took all of their eyeglasses and shoelaces and everything away from them every night, and they were only able to eat with spoons, no forks, nothing sharp. They were watched constantly. They were not allowed to put their hands under the blankets when they slept at night or turn away to the wall. This is all to prevent suicide. Outside of the Palace of Justice, guards everywhere. Another reason why Nuremberg was a great place to hold the trial is it had one standing hotel also, the Grand Hotel. And it had a bomb that had dropped right through the center of it here. Some of the stories that I read from the correspondents and lawyers and other trial personnel who were put up here said that they had to walk a plank from one side of the hotel to the others. And they would get in their rooms and they would have to deal with bath mats with little swastikas on it. And there might not even be a wall in the back that when they open up the curtains. But they fixed it all up. And this is what it looked like. And the Grand Hotel became the only place where all of the high-ranking lawyers and others could socialize. But they were eating off of silverware with the Third Reich everywhere. Outside of the Grand Hotel and in Nuremberg, this is what Hitler did to Germany. Women and children were the only ones left, and they were living underground as they could. Most people carted their things around in baby carriages because that's all there was. Lots of little children. All the men were gone at war or dead. How was the trial covered by the press? Well, this is another building that on the outskirts of town. If you've ever used a number 2 pencil, this is the family that owned the Faber pencil company, Eberhard Faber. And this is their family castle that was turned into a press camp where 250 international correspondents were put up. And you can see them eating dinner. This was a New Year's Eve celebration. But here's what they did during the day. They were all bused to the court and sat in a certain section of the room. Here's Walter Cronkite. He was one of the famous correspondents that covered Nuremberg early in his career. There was a press room just beneath the courthouse, the courtroom, where everyone was briefed and they were given trial documents every day. There was so much paper. It's been said that all the paper generated and Xeroxed at Nuremberg would span 47 miles high. And before I really understood what my dad did as a clerk typist, I was thinking maybe he typed some of that. In fact, he did, but he did a lot of other things too. Paper, paper. This is the press room. This is just a life in the moment as they're either waiting for trial or a break with everyone's portable typewriters, because that's what it was in 1945. The Russians brought a large contingency of press also. And here, this is their section in the press room. And they brought some very talented court illustrators, some of the more interesting cartoons depicting the Nazis as vermin. And you can see they're using their glasses to take a good look and sketch. Here's a couple of other of the Russian cartoons, court illustrations. Ernst Kaltenbrunner replaced Himmler and oversaw the Gestapo and the death camps. I particularly like this one with the hatchet. When the verdicts were given, the only way, there was a lot of competition to get your story in. Now, these are the international correspondents from AP and others, and they literally ran to file their story because that was the only way to ensure that newspapers would run it. If you got in first, they would be committed to you. So it was a stampede out of the courtroom. Here's a color picture of Courtroom 600 while in session, but it didn't always look like this. In July, when the US and the Allies toured the facility to see if it was going to be the right place for trial, Courtroom 600 had been used as a kind of a rec room for the Army GIs after we conquered Nuremberg in April. Here's some life pinups on the back wall, Texas bar, and someone had actually carved in here, no glass, no beer, canteen cup, okay. There were empty cases of Coca-Cola bottles and beer kegs. And you can see the chandeliers. This is a building that had been constructed at the turn of the century into 1900. Much of the building was not electrified. There were no telephone cables in. The US Army had a lot of work to do. But first they needed to renovate the courtroom. And so they made a scale model of it, completely reorienting everything. All of the furniture had to be made from scratch. And opening factories to replace glass windows and tiles and get building supplies was another huge hurdle for the US Army to overcome. When I started to looking at pictures at Nuremberg of the courtroom, I couldn't believe the different camera shots from all these different high angles. Well, this is how they got them. They built in photo booths everywhere so the trial could be documented. They ripped everything out and started over. And they also enlarged the back wall. So here's one of the pictures taken from that room that they carved out in the attic. They pushed out the entire back wall of the courtroom to enlarge it because it wouldn't be large enough to hold the press and visitors. And this was a massive construction feat, considering a US architect working in the metric system with German prisoners of war and the calculations of all of the, everything that they had to do to build it. But now here's a picture from the top of the new balcony for visitors, looking down. This is in a rehearsal mode. They're getting ready. They're almost ready for trial. And you can see a diagram of how they've reoriented the courtroom. In the front, instead of where the judge used to be, now is a film screen for photo and visual evidence. The judges along the right-hand side face the defendants in the dock on the left. And then at the bottom, here are the tables for the prosecution teams and the press and the gallery. Many photographers had fought through the war. This is a Russian photographer in Berlin at the Liberation, and here he is in courtroom 600, waiting his turn to take a picture of Hermann Goering after he consults with his defense counsel. Nuremberg pioneered so many firsts. It was the world's first international trial. It's the first time that film and photo evidence had been used in a trial, and it also pioneered simultaneous interpretation. Here are live translators behind glass panes, and they're using a system with headsets where, depending on what language you spoke, German, Russian, English, or French, you just turn the dial and then put on an IBM headset. And that's how everyone worked in the trial. Because if they had done it with consecutive translation, the trial would have taken 4 times as long to hear what someone said and then have it repeated in 4 languages. So really, they pioneered this, and then it went from here to the United Nations. Here's a shot of rehearsal. And there are the interpreters. You can see all of the headsets. We're in the dock where the major war criminals are going to sit. And we've got Army GIs standing in at this point. But you can see there are no backs on the benches. Well, the architect wanted to make it hard for them. But during this rehearsal shot where you can see all of the GIs standing in, it was determined that it would be too much of a hardship for older men. And so the backs to those benches were added basically on the night before the trial started. Literally, women were still sewing carpets down the day before the trial. And you can imagine how many types of rehearsals were needed with all of the microphones, because they were recording every word. And to make sure that we recorded everything properly, all of these audio technicians were required to switch between the microphones from the judges, the defendants, the lawyer's booth, and then the witness stand. And I had the good fortune of meeting him, who lives in Chicago and is still alive, to hear his stories of what it was like to be there. 4 nations: the Russians, the British, the United States, and the French. There were 100,000 captured documents. And think about the work to analyze, to translate and analyze all those documents in just a matter of months. 100 million feet of film. Film is how the Holocaust really, really was brought into the middle of the war and the trial itself. The evidence of the concentration camps, it was absolutely made world headlines. So this is the story of Courtroom 600. It's the story of the trial. It's the story of the people who put it on, of how they found out about it. And as I was making my way through all of this, in August of 2017, Charlottesville and the tiki torches and the young men saying, "Jews will not replace us." It was an alarm bell to me. I wanted to create something, a learning experience of everything that I had compiled. But I realized at that point in time that my work needed to move along faster and take a different turn and turn it to young people. And so through an opportunity from Arizona State University Teachers College, they asked for a photo analysis site using all the pictures that I had gotten from these archives. They wanted to use this way of teaching future social studies teachers just with pictures, analyze what's in it, and think about the historical context of what you're seeing, of what life was like, the human experience. And so this site was put up. in 3 different galleries with photos of all of the profiles of the major war criminals, how the trial was put together, and then the proceedings itself. And so just to give you a couple of snapshots of how it works, I wanted to paint a profile of the major war criminals in only 3 to 5 images per person, but painting what they did and starting with their affiliation with Hitler and ending with them on the prison. And so Julius Streicher, the propagandist who incited hatred through his Der Stürmer publication, children's books, and many other types of communications, that was his contribution to inciting evil. Here is the press section with Walter Cronkite again. This is my dad's boss here, Burton Andrus, with his internal security detachment armband. There were women correspondents, many women correspondents at the trial as well. This picture on the right is taken in Hermann Goering's prison cell, and that was a PR photo designed to illustrate suicide prevention techniques. The little table where he put his cigarettes and family photos and wrote his letters and looked at his trial proceedings was only made to withstand 10 pounds. So he could never stand on it and try to hang himself. And no one was allowed in the prison, so these PR photos were very important. Evidence. On the left, taken in Buchenwald concentration camp shortly after liberation, the horrendous, awful, tattooed human skin, shrunken heads, and lampshades, also made out of human skin, and the tarp being held up by concentration camp prisoners. On the right, this was an exhibit in Courtroom 600 of that very same chest of a man on display. I never want to forget how completely overwhelmed I was with the number of people involved and how complex it was. Who did what? What were they responsible for? Nuremberg needs to be made accessible for younger people in a way that's more simple and that they can dive into just in small chunks at a time. And it needs to be turned into something that's interactive. This is a graphic I put together of some of the major war criminals, just to illustrate that concept. And to give you a quick tour of what some of these people did, here's Hans Fritzsche. He was a stand-in for Joseph Goebbels, the propagandist. And here's just, some examples. Propaganda spanned everything from radio, newspaper, films, books, everything. Julius Streicher, you've already seen him. He published Der Stürmer. That was also part of the propaganda. Alfred Rosenberg. He was the spiritual psychologist, if you will. He was instrumental in implementing the book bans and stealing all of Jewish culture. Wilhelm Frick was a manager in government and very, very intricately involved in the Nuremberg laws that took away citizenship rights and made it so that Jews were not allowed to ride trains. At one point, they couldn't even have dogs and pets. Baldur von Schirach was head of the Hitler Youth Group and charged with indoctrinating even the youngest children into the Nazi racial ideology, preparing an entire generation for war in service of Hitler and teaching young boys that they wanted to do nothing else but die for Hitler. The military, Alfred Jodl, Wilhelm Keitel, Goering, and Erich Raeder. The Navy, the Army, the submarines, all of it. Fritz Sauckel, Albert Speer, slave labor. And Kaltenbrunner, who you saw earlier in a cartoon. He was responsible for the death camps and deporting people. Walter Funk, He was head of the Reich Bank. He knew that gold rings were and teeth were being pulled off of concentration camp victims before or after they died. And they had all of this shipped to the bank. He knew all about that. And Goering, what can be said about him except he was the kingpin of it all? Hitler's designated successor, as you had seen, he was in it from the very beginning. So how do we teach the lessons of Nuremberg? How do we create an experience where young people and global citizens can peruse this vast amount of information? Learn about the human experience. This was my vision from Courtroom 600, from all of those people that you just saw. You can access their stories. How was the art stolen? How was the trial reported? The psychology of the Nazi mind. If you're studying law, Nuremberg is right up there. The military history, and of course, the Holocaust. I'm excited to tell you that along my journey, I met a retiring teacher from a Chicago school who had used the Nuremberg trials to teach Nazi Germany and world history for over 35 years. And I showed him the photo gallery and I said, can you lay an education component on top of what I've done? This is not my thing. I'm a multimedia designer, but how do we create curriculum? And so putting our heads together, and the way that he had organized his classroom was around the 4 indictments of Nuremberg. And it's he told me it's a very efficient way to teach about World War II because all of the Nuremberg prosecutors and the evidence they had found proved without a doubt all of these crimes. So our vision for students is bite-sized podcasts because their attention spans are short, photo galleries to go along with it and bring that history to life, and other resources that students can use to take notes, graphic organizers. For the teachers, because teaching about Nuremberg is new and novel. 20-minute training podcasts to help them understand Nazi ideology and anti-Semitism and its roots. Lesson plans that span from 8th grade all the way to 12th grade with a suite of resources and activities that can be used in different types of social studies classes, not just world history, but AP psychology, international relations, and of course, Holocaust education as well, civics, very, very flexible curriculum. We launched our first module this spring, Conspiracy. It was the cause of war in Europe, and Nuremberg proved it. Our podcast takes a narrative approach and asks students, what would it be like if you were a young person growing up in Germany in the 20s and 30s? What would you see happening in your classwork, in your life, around you? This is what we want students to come away with from Module 1. They have a very clear understanding that the war was not caused by World War I grievances, as Hitler had put forth, and is taught in many ways in classrooms across the country. It was not the Treaty of Versailles. It was not a combination of social, economic, and factors after the Great Depression. Hitler's war aims point directly to the fact that he felt entitled to conquer Europe and exterminate those that he deemed inferior. And after the lesson, we ask students to think about their own morals and values. Think about the choices that they are making every day in their lives, because it was a choice for Germans to go along with Hitler. Now, granted, the propaganda, the 100% nonstop, you couldn't get anything else, but you could think for yourself if you wanted to. And we are asking young people to think about the choices they're making every day and how those choices are shaping their future. So this curriculum is very, very much focused on ethics and accountability and asking children to reflect and think deeply. Module 2 will be about the actual waging of aggressive war, crimes against peace. Module 3 is war crimes, which is something that young people and everyone see in their news feeds daily and don't really understand what they mean. It's a very large category and it's complex. We're going to break it down. And the last charge, crimes against humanity, was something that was created specifically at Nuremberg because they couldn't put the level of atrocities into any of those other charges. So crimes against humanity was invented at Nuremberg. Next year, we know the war ends. We know that the liberation of the camps is happening, but the start of the trial also happens next November. The 80th anniversary of Nuremberg starts November 20th. And the trial took almost 10 months. And so it runs the span of November through October of 2026. And that's when we hope to launch our completed series of curriculum. And this is who we are targeting specifically. These young boys and young girls, they're spending 8 hours a day on their phones. 40% of US high school students report being in a persistent state of sadness or hopelessness. And what's happening is they're getting online, they're searching for community, and they're finding it through recruiters. Recruiters are sending them what look like innocent memes. And all they have to do is hit like on something like that. And from the far left and the far right, they unleash a steady stream of recruitment messages that start out with innocent offers of friendship, but then they work the ideology in. This is what's happening to our youth today. And pretty soon you've got someone who's bullied in class, socially isolated, getting online, and then buying into it. And our goal with Courtroom 600 is to prevent today's youth from becoming tomorrow's perpetrators. And we do that by showing students the consequences of following evil ideologies. After launching Module 1, we did a national review with teachers from coast to coast. And we wanted to know if we really had something or not. We actually got our Module 1 test run in a couple classrooms in Illinois, and were able to get some data. And the teacher, one of the piloting teachers, her quote says, "The vivid description of life for young people growing up in Germany is particularly engaging and relatable for ninth graders. The personalization of historical events helps students see the human impact of political ideologies." And then for the students, we asked them, after doing this lesson and listening to the podcast and looking at the photos and reflecting on their values, did you actually reflect on your values? And this is at the end of the school year. 73% said yes or some effect. And this is in a test run the first time. So we're incredibly encouraged by this. And here is what we see as part of a marketing opportunity. In 29 states, we currently have mandates for Holocaust education. But for those others, can we make an impact there? Can we get into those gray states there? And how can we partner with Holocaust educators to enrich their work? Because we're coming at it from a different angle. And that's where Scott and I started to have the meeting of the minds and realize that there are partnerships to be formed. You know, there's an old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. And I did through all my research in those years and discovering what my father did, but it's led to so much more. So if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go further, go together. And that's where we are now. And it's really exciting, the kinds of partnerships that we've started to cultivate. And I'm excited to say that we will be in Omaha Public Schools partnering with the Institute for Holocaust Education in March, delivering professional development on our first module to students there and piloting it. And we have other foundations that we're working with as well. We'll be in New York at their annual social studies conference, delivering a workshop there as well. And this is just the start. If you take a look at this, there are aspirational types of partnerships. We're starting in the social studies lane because this is world history, and that's where we can get in. We can get into world history classes and civics and using all of these other organizations to partner up. But it's not just for the kids. Courtroom 600 addresses law students and other types of Holocaust resources. We're doing a webinar with Echoes and Reflections, which is another partner of the Institute for Holocaust Education. We have met with the U.S. Department of State and the Eradicate Hate Global Summit about teaching all of the people in community leaders and government officials and news literacy organizations. And then Jewish education, we can enrich that as well. Beyond our traditional social studies classes in history and psychology, we see an opportunity to do some lesson extensions and address the kinds of issues in social studies classes today. Those kids who are on their phones, there's a mental health crisis with young people. Anti-Semitism and anti-hate, we all know, is at a fever pitch. We need to teach the lessons of human rights. And young people need stronger news literacy to combat misinformation that's coming at them from every angle. This is our project roadmap online. So the curriculum is where we start with our teacher resources, but we plan to move into having traveling exhibits that can move to cultural centers and libraries and move our curriculum beyond the schools to community affiliations. And then the virtual museum that I spoke of earlier, creating 3D environments and leveraging digital technology as it evolves, which is so exciting. So that is what I've been working on with our team and with the help of the Institute for Holocaust Education and so many other partners. And thank you so much for listening. And I can't wait to hear your questions now.
Thank you, Laura. If you would just there we go. First of all, thank you so much. Again, we're so excited about all of this, and especially this being the 80th year of the trials. I'm going to start with the first question, and that is, what do you think you learned most about your father from this?
Well, the greatest generation was also called the silent generation. And I've met along my journey, I've connected with other descendants, guards, daughters and sons of guards and lawyers and court reporters, and we've become friends. And I've asked them, what did your dad tell you? Many of them, their father spoke. I'll never know why my father didn't tell me his story. But what I learned was he saw and heard things that I'm sure he wanted to bury. He wanted to come home and raise a family.
Thank you. We've heard similar, exactly that type of answer. Mark, why don't you put your hand down there and please go ahead and ask your question.
All right, I got to figure out how to put the hand down, but I'll ask the question first. First, Laurie, what amazing work! I'm really impressed, and what a contribution for all of us. It's incredible. So, thank you for all the effort you've put into that, and it's amazing. The question was, have you happened to see Hitler and the Nazis: Evil on Trial, the Netflix thing, and what did you think of it?
I thought it was a well done series, and in particular because of the generation of young people that are watching Netflix and looking for content there. I wouldn't say that that's high school age. I would say that that's people in their 20s and 30s. But it was a modern approach, kind of a comprehensive and different approach through the journalist William Shirer and his daughter, correct? Yes. So William Shirer, he stayed at the Faber Castle along with the other journalists, but he got sick early in the trial and his mother died and he had to go home. But his documentation of the rise and the fall of the Third Reich, and the Nazi regime where he was there covering it all through the 30s, stands alone. And so that's an incredible contribution there to the knowledge with his daughter, and of course I watched that from my own perspective to see, her reaction and all too, So thank you for asking that.
So I'd also like to make the group aware, and we're going to actually make the community aware shortly. During our Week of Understanding this year, Laurie is going to be coming in and being one of our presenters, and she's going to be in the Wahoo, one of the presentations we do with Wahoo Public Schools, which also is then transmitted throughout the state, and probably in that presentation, over 1,500 students will get to hear her family story. And the other event, one of them will be the speaker at the Durham Museum on the Wednesday evening of our Week of Understanding. And then on Thursday, we're working out the details. Laurie and Lindsay from Omaha Public Schools, a member of our advisory board, are working out as far as to begin this teacher training. And as Laurie said, beginning as we're moving through this, and IHE is very, very excited to be a part of this. I think one of our obligations is always trying to figure out the next way that we are going to be able to get these stories across. And Harriet has let me see, I got to bring it back up because, as I always say with this, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So let me see. I don't know if Laurie said, but where did she find the papers from her father? Were they in your house in storage? How did you come about that bag of material?
So my father, I was on the West Coast on a video shoot when I got a phone call saying that my father had deteriorated and they were putting him into hospice. And I had to fly back to Chicago, and then after I had to finish my shoot, fly back to Chicago and then to South Florida where my dad lived. By the time I got there, they had already sedated him. And I walked into his room and was handed a crumpled shopping bag with all of this in it and said, "Your father wanted you to have this." And I said, "Well, oh, what is it?" And they're like, "Well, it's his war stuff." So I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And I'm thinking, why aren't the boys getting the war stuff? But I know now why he gave it to me, because I'm the only one who would have as a producer, I could figure out what to do with it. I hope that's what he thought.
Are there any other questions? Please, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a similar situation. My father served in the Army during World War II, and my brothers and I would get into a closet where he would keep some of the pictures, but he never liked to talk about it. And my mother told me that he didn't talk about it because he lost too many friends that died there. But I think the purpose of your talk was for World War II education, Holocaust education. And what I've been hearing, what I've been reading, is that it hasn't really made a big impact. Holocaust education really isn't working. So what you're doing is very helpful. And I know many European countries have not taught Holocaust education until most recently because of their shame. A couple questions regarding your talk. Where did Hermann Goering hide his cyanide tablet?
That's a really good question. And there's theories around that too. It was given to him by a guard. He gifted his watch to this particular guard too. He was from Tennessee, and there are pictures of them together having, conversations. Goering was a big hunter, and this particular guard was into hunting also. He was very athletic, and he cultivated some kind of a friendship with him and talked him into it. So he got it from a guard.
And I did notice that in some of the headphones, which from 1 to 5 different languages, that was made by IBM. And IBM also I'm aware that they helped the Germans in lists for Jewish people living in different towns and cities.
Their tabulation devices were used to help the Nazis count.
Right.
Thank you, Bob. And Bob, offline at one point, maybe when we see each other downstairs here, we can have a further discussion about the effectiveness of Holocaust education and throughout the world, things that are happening, because I want to talk further with you about that one, but we won't do it here. Any other questions that we have? Well, what's interesting, Laurie, just so you know, we've been, one of our members of our community, her father was a Ritchie boy, part of that organization.
Oh.
Come here, I'll show you a whole lot more. But we're devoting 3 programs this year to the learning more about the Ritchie boys, and in particular, Margot Parso's father. In his case, he didn't talk at all about his experience, much like your father's, and she had all of these artifacts from him as a Ritchie boy and the things that he came into possession of. And actually now, with the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society, we have a curated exhibit of his of many of these items. And just so you know, as a group, in March, Jen Garza, who is works in the Historical Society, will present on those artifacts and how she chose which ones to be a part of what we're showing. But next month, we will be having Sharon Brodke, the executive director of the JCRC, talking about some of the things that IHE and JCRC are doing together, but the efforts that we have here in Omaha and in Nebraska to combat anti-Semitism, and I think you'll find that very interesting. I want to thank Laurie. I want to thank Bill for making the introduction. Bill has an Omaha connection, and through David Schwab, also introduced, as far as got Howard Epstein and myself involved in all of this. And I love, as all of you know, IHE prides itself on all of its collaborations and partnerships. So I'm very excited to see where this is going. And I want to wish everybody a wonderful holiday season. And we will see you all next month. And again, Laurie and Bill, thank you so much for being able to be here today to present this amazing story.
Thank you so much.
See you all next month. Laurie, we'll be in touch in the next couple weeks.
Sounds great.
Great, thank you.